Hey folks, welcome to this week's edition of Daryl and Boo Show. How's it going, Boo?
Good, how are you doing?
I'm good. Say a belated happy birthday. It was Boo's birthday yesterday. He was up in Vernon sharing his birthday weekend with his family. So I'm sure that was fun to be up in Vernon and enjoy your birthday with the rest of your family, Boo?
Yeah, it was good. The weather is kind of on and off, good and bad here. So it was raining a bit yesterday. We actually tried to get out and we loaded up the kids' bikes onto the bike rack and drove out to Cousins Bay, I believe it's called, and got out there and it just started to rain. We tried to find a different area that might be a little bit easier, even if with a little bit of rain, but then it started to rain more. So we just packed up everything and then went back home and that was fine. The kids still had fun doing what they're doing. How about yourself? What'd you get up to?
Yeah, it was a fun weekend. We had some friends over on Friday evening, just went out to a local spot here for sushi and then came back to our place and they taught us a game with dice. So you've got like 10 dice in this game. And anyways, I won't go into all the details, but lots of fun playing that.
Huh.
And then Saturday night, again, went out for dinner with another couple to a spot that we like, a Greek place on Kingsway. And yesterday was just out there enjoying the sun. First time, obviously, in a long time. We had a nice sunny, warm day. So we just got out there and enjoyed it all day. So yeah, it was a nice weekend.
Cool.
Yeah. So shall we bring on Sander then now, Boo? Or
sounds good.
Okay.
There we go.
Here he is.
Hey, fellas.
Hey, Sander.
How's it going?
Very good. We are fortunate to have Sander Vinberg joining us for this week's show. Sanders has a very interesting role. He's a threat research evangelist for F5 Labs. Some folks listening might know a little bit about F5 Labs, but for those who don't, Sander, maybe just share a little bit of info on kind of what you do and what's involved with F5 Labs.
Yeah, sure. Labs is a pretty small team, I think 8 people now within F5. And our only purpose is to do research on the state of security and get it out there to the public in a number of ways. We write short articles about threats. We write long reports about sort of the entire risk landscape. We do a lot of speaking events. And really the goal is to sort of just put tools in people's hands, both in the hands of internal F5 folks, in the hands of our customers, but also just kind of for the security community in general, because security is one of those things that really needs a lot of collaboration, right? So there are lots of folks at F5 that are really, really good at security that are approaching it from one of specific angles. We are really just trying to give people the broadest set of intelligence that they need to just improve their security.
Yeah, it's awesome. And we are fortunate to have Sander come and speak at 2 pretty important security events, annual security events that happen in BC. So Sander spoke at BC Aware and also at the Privacy and Security Conference in Victoria too. So we had great feedback and comments from a number of customers who kind of sat in your discussion. And I recall, to your point, it really had nothing to do with F5. Your discussion was just all around some of the research that was done in 2019 and some of the findings, which were really cool. So,
thanks. Yeah, those conferences were fantastic. They were really good. Like the other speakers, all the conversations I had, everybody I met there, I was like, man, this is just phenomenal. It was also like some of the final things I did before we all got locked down, right? So they sort of loom large in my memory, but I had a really good time, really, really great conferences, both of those.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. The privacy and security, I think, just surpassed last year or the year before the 20th anniversary. So it's been going a long time and is very well respected. And yeah, you get obviously a lot of customers attending from British Columbia, but each year it tends to kind of grow from other provinces and even people coming up from the US. And coming up this year, so yeah, we're very fortunate to have both of those in our province, but they're kind of blending the two together coming up next year and moving it over to Vancouver. So BC and Aware and the privacy and security will be one, I think, one massive event. Yeah. So
cool.
Really hoping to be there again. We've never really missed it in the last 7 or 8 years, and if possible, get you up and have you speak again.
Yeah, if they'll have me, I would go in a heartbeat.
Perfect.
Yeah.
So we know from just chatting with you personally that you've got some musical prowess. Do you want to talk a little bit about kind of where you're from and maybe some of your background around music?
Yeah, for sure. The where I'm from is kind of a long story. I'll try to make it short. We bounced around a lot, right? My folks are from Sweden and they moved here before I was born. So I was born in San Diego, and then after we lived there for a couple of years, we just started moving around quite a lot. So I spent some time in San Diego. I spent some time on the East Coast. We moved out to Seattle shortly before I went to school in Chicago. Then when I finished school, after all this moving around, I kind of just had my choice and came back to Seattle. And that was a point where I started really focusing on music a little bit more than I had. You know, when I was younger, it was always something I really enjoyed, but it wasn't something I like necessarily planned to make like a cornerstone of my life. And then around the time I finished school, I realized that was mostly what I wanted to be doing, for good or bad. Right. So once I got back to Seattle, I had been a jazz trumpet player for a really long time. And I sort of hit a plateau, or not sort of, I hit a complete and utter plateau on the trumpet when I was like 24, 25 years old. And I was talking with some of my teachers at the time. They were like, they essentially laid it out and said that if I really wanted to progress on this instrument, I kind of had to break it all down and start over. Yeah. And I was going through that process, and it was like, I was like a 25-year-old sounding like a 5th grader. You know, it was humiliating. Huh. And at the same time, I was playing bass for fun. Just like I had picked up my friend's bass once hanging out, and I was like, oh my God, this is such a different instrument. It's such a different role and different mentality. And I started getting gigs on the bass while I was flailing on the trumpet. And so sometimes you just got to like go with the path of least resistance, right? So I started playing bass, and all of a sudden, after a couple of years, I was doing like a couple shows a week with a couple different bands. I was super busy for a while. Wow. It was great. I loved it. But making money or even just breaking even in music is real hard these days. So ended up sort of bouncing between bands. I think this thing happens a lot where you get a lot of momentum with a group and you're gigging really hard and you're recording and you're kind of throwing everything you got at it. And then when that doesn't work out, like it doesn't for most bands, you kind of have this like turning point where either you double down and you keep going, and some of the bands that double down end up doing really well. Some of the ones end up kind of fizzling, right? And so we kind of came to this natural cycle after a couple of releases. And I made a decision to step out of that band. They're still going. Those guys are still gigging. Since then, I've been sort of bouncing around, not super productively, but studying a bunch of instruments. At the moment, I'm doing piano, double bass, drums. I actually was teaching at a music school for several years. So I was teaching drums and bass and trumpet for a while. And these days, most of my own personal practice on the piano. So I sort of go through these like cycles of great focus and lots of productivity, and then cycles where I'm just kind of messing around, you know. But it's It's an interesting thing. It's like the most individual thing I've ever done.
Yeah.
You know, it's like you can't. There are days where it's like there's nothing anybody else can say that's going to make me not play music, and then there are other days where it's like I'm just not feeling it. Like there's nothing I could do that'll make me feel it, right? So it's like this constant ebb and flow of productivity and motivation and everything else. But yeah, I would really love to find the right people and put together another group or two. But I'm also finding that it depends so much on the other folks that it's like I've tried to put together a bunch of trios in the last few years, and either the personalities are right, but the musical personalities aren't quite right. And so it's like we want to do a thing and it's just not working. Or sometimes it's like the music's right, but the personalities just aren't right. We don't see eye to eye on the music. And at this point, it's like I'm sort of I've realized you can't force that stuff, right? So I've actually I keep putting together a little group, working for a little bit, and then sort of being like, that's not the group for me. And then I'll find a couple more folks, put some together, and then realize it's not working. So at the moment, I'm just self-practicing and studying a lot of theory and stuff like that. So it's like I said, ebbs and flows.
Yeah, and you actually cut, if I recall, in some previous bands, you actually cut some albums. Was that right?
Yeah. I was playing in a band for a while called Vaudeville Etiquette, and we did an EP and 2 full-length albums while I was with them. And I think they've done 2 EPs since then. And recorded an album with a group called Sarah Gerritsen and the Shadowcatchers. I was on her second album. Both of Vaudeville Etiquette's second album and Sarah's are both recorded at a really cool studio in Seattle that's actually owned by some of the guys from Pearl Jam.
Oh, wow.
And the studio is incredible. Their mic collection is incredible. The engineers that work there are really good folks. Fantastic musicians in their own right. So those 2 recording projects were some of the most fun. I recorded a few projects that never actually got published, never saw the light of day. I did a couple things with a guitarist called Jacob Navarro, who lives up in Anacortes. That was actually a really intense recording session, just because he is such a dialed musician and he hears everything. And it was just the 2 of us. So it's like you have nowhere to hide. And it's like everything, he's super, I don't want to say self-critical, because I don't mean it in a bad way, but he's working on all these levels at once, right? And so it's like everything you do, he will work off of that for good and for bad. And so it was a really psychologically intense recording session. And those tracks have never got published, and sometimes I wish we had, because they're really raw and they're not super polished, but they're super cool.
Huh. Oh, obviously, no relation to Dave Navarro, I assume. This guy.
Oh yeah.
It is related.
What?
No,
sorry. Oh no, sorry, not related to Jacob Navarro, unfortunately.
No. Yeah.
We'll have to link to all your published stuff in the show notes.
Yeah, for sure. It feels weird, right? Because a lot of these things happened a few years ago, and it's not as though I just haven't played in a couple of years, but I haven't really put anything out, haven't had a really prominent gig in a couple of years, which is a little demoralizing when I put it like that. But the music, I mean, I think those recordings are still good.
Yeah.
Cool.
You'll see in the background, and I think we mentioned this before, Boo's father-in-law, where he's right now in Vernon, you can see some of his guitars and drum set in the back. So his father-in-law has an active band called the Creeks, and I think primarily Bob, your father-in-law, Boo, is the drummer, but obviously proficient guitar player also, and teaches drums and teaches guitar. So
he actually plays guitar usually. The 3 of them will play guitar. He'll actually play banjo as well. I should even show some of his stuff here. You might not like that, because one of his banjos is very special, and he had to, there's a whole story behind it, but he had to basically put his name in a lottery draw for it. It's a custom made banjo, and some people don't get drawn to even buy a banjo ever from this custom banjo maker, but he plays that. And the other 2 guys who play guitar. Pardon me?
So you got to win a lottery just to have the privilege of buying one of these instruments.
Yeah.
That's pretty fancy.
Yeah.
I've never been at that level.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. So he got one of those. My brother-in-law will actually play drums for them when he's available for that. But otherwise, they sound great with just the guitars. And I get what you're saying in that you have to have a personality mix and a musical mix at the same time. So the three of them enjoy the same type of music and they get along really well. And I think they are at the same point in their lives as well with how they want to pursue music at this point. So
cool. Yeah.
Nobody's out there trying to get famous or anything like that, but they
Right.
just enjoy putting out music and sharing it with everyone and playing gigs around town. So I can see where I have other friends who are musicians where, people are at different stages and it can fall apart really easily.
Yeah, right when I was leaving university in Chicago, I had been playing in a university band there, and the band leader was actually an amazing guy and a really, really good teacher. And he taught just one or two classes at the university, but he also was a really serious musician in Chicago and had been a member of a pretty avant-garde scene of jazz in Chicago. Really amazing guy. His name's Wada Bowden, and did a lot for me. And when I was leaving town, I told him, I was like, "Hey, Wada, like, I want to make music a bigger thing. I want to see if I can pursue it professionally. What do you think?" And the one thing he said is don't start a band with your friends. Mm-hmm. Hire your friends. You start a band, like run it like a business, because that's what this is. And when you look at all of I think that's a little bit specific to jazz. And I think that's partly because jazz is such a live form of music. And also that's kind of where the history comes from in terms of what the opportunities were for jazz musicians 30, 50 years ago. But he essentially said, don't, like, by all means make music with your friends, but don't be in a group with your friends. Own your business and start a band with your friends. And I didn't take his advice. I like moved out here, and partly it's because when you're a bassist, it's really, really hard to be a band leader and a bassist, right? Obviously people do it. Charles Mingus did it, Sting did it, but not that many people lead from the bass role. And so it was hard for me to hire my friends because I was joining other people's groups, and those bands weren't structured that way. And it's really interesting in retrospect. I sort of feel like he was right in some ways, or rather it's like, if you take that approach, you are going to have some advantages. And in the jazz community, if you work with your friends for a couple of years and then you say, hey, you are a fantastic musician, but I want to work with someone else, or I want to change it up, that's not considered like a slap in the face, you know? Whereas with the groups that I was playing in, it was so personal and so sort of tied up with the personal relationships that if you just swap out your drummer, it's like a really, really big thing, because when you're on the road with these folks, it's like when I was playing with Bob Valetica, I probably saw those folks more than I saw my girlfriend.
Yeah.
So it's like, it's a really, really tough thing. It's like, sometimes it's all business. Sometimes it's like really intertwined with your friendships and your relationships. And I don't necessarily think that one is right over the other, but it sure is hard to separate these things.
Yeah. And I personally think I'm a big music fan, so I think it's awesome that you've had that background and you still have the ability to kind of get out there and do live shows. But interesting kind of mix between what you do at F5 Labs and your music. But I kind of would see, because I believe the research that you do with F5 Labs is not something that you start up and you're done in a week. It tends to go for, weeks, months, even into years. You're studying music, and is there some things that you've taken from your background in kind of studying music that you think have helped in the work that you do at F5 Labs?
I do, yeah. And it's funny because there are all these stereotypes that musicians are disorganized and flakes, and they show up late to the gig. But partly I think it's just the folks that I studied with. It was like, if a rehearsal starting at 7, you show up at 6:40, and you get all your stuff in order. And then when they say the rehearsal starts at 7, that means that the notes, like you start playing notes at 7, right?
Yeah.
And so there was this, again, like this sort of like focus on individuality. It's like you have nowhere to hide as a musician, and you have no excuses. You can't say, oh, it was bad luck or something. I mean, if you get in a car crash on the way to the gig, that's different, right? But that's a big part of it. And the other thing is that you have to kind of pursue this balance between the big picture and the details. You need to approach your practice in a really methodical way if you want to get to a high level, right? Mm-hmm. It's like if you pick up your instrument and noodle around for 15 minutes playing the licks that you already think are sweet, that's fun. Like, I don't want to criticize that, but you're also not really going to you're not going to go where you want to go, right? And so like there's a lot about it that I think you got to be real with yourself, and you got to kind of ask yourself, hey, if I'm feeling tired, if I played for 45 minutes or an hour or something, and I'm feeling kind of tired, and I want to put down my instrument and go just drink a beer or whatever. These days, it's like I want to go sit on the back porch and just enjoy the sunshine, right? You can do that, and it's like at this point, no one. It's not like my parents are going to come and be like, "Hey, did you practice today?" It's like that's just on me, right? So this like degree of sort of responsibility and the relationship between how I go about my thing and what my goals and outcomes are, I think that translates over quite a lot, right? Because it's like the work that I do it's not individual at labs. Fortunately, I have a bunch of really, really great collaborators, and that's a big part of why I think a lot of the lab stuff comes out good, is that we have some different perspectives. But you have to kind of keep an eye on your methods and make sure that you're doing things rigorously, because I don't think that we're approaching like academic levels of scientific rigor, but we try to be as scientific as possible. We try to use good data science practices as much as possible. And this kind of relationship between how we're going about a thing, what the outcomes are, how we're even structuring those questions, to me, that has a lot of parallels in terms of how you go about actually pursuing growth and pursuing excellence in music. I think you could probably say the same thing for a high performance athlete and the way that they go about training, right? It's more about kind of how you achieve that depth in terms of what you're going for. But yeah, I mean, a really big part of it is just like, don't have any excuses, be real with yourself. And if it comes out the way you wanted, that's because you did it the way that other folks have laid out the path for you, right? And it's like, you got to take that, you got to walk that path yourself. That is something that I believe very strongly in. And it's the greatest irony that I came to that conclusion by studying jazz, which is not anybody's idea of like a really old school formal approach, but there's a lot of discipline and focus in there.
Yeah, that's cool. And some people may know or may not know the work that some of the work that is an output from F5 Labs is actually built into some of the solutions that we deploy with our customers. Threat campaigns is, I guess, still relatively new to us, but is growing and is really a very substantial part of many of the security solutions that we offer to our customers. So maybe a couple minute overview on what a threat campaign is and kind of how customers can take advantage of that.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, to be clear, the threat campaign's output that's going into the product is almost all coming from a research team in Tel Aviv.
Okay.
And so unfortunately, Labs is not involved in producing that output. We consume it a little bit, and we talk with those guys about what they're seeing. Those guys are extraordinarily good researchers, and also really, really great guys. It was just around this time last year, one of the other Labs folks, Remy Cohen, and I went over to Tel Aviv and talked with those guys, and they treated us really, really well. They were super welcoming, showed us all their work, and it was incredibly impressive. But those threat campaigns are sort of a combination of a little bit of AI and machine learning to sort of flag anomalous traffic in some sensors that the Tel Aviv team manages. And then a combination. So it's a combination of some automated detection plus some human curation and enrichment of those to weed out some false positives, to sort of make sure that they're able to identify something significant, and then they release those in threat campaigns. And we talk with the Tel Aviv guys a little bit. We're really hoping to collaborate with them more, because a lot of their stuff tends to be focused on identifying new stuff to push the product for SIGs or signatures and stuff, right?
Mhm.
The labs research questions are more long-term, more about the relationship between a specific set of tactics and the threat actor and the targets they're going after and what the outcomes are, and sort of a more holistic view of the entire security perspective. And so we would love to sort of get a little bit better at working with them to frame some research questions around the raw output that they have before because their enrichment is very, very tactical in origin, because that's the job that they're trying to do, right? But if we could get around and sort of enrich the data that their machine learning platforms are flagging, and then in turn sort of ask bigger picture, more long-term time frame analyses of those, I think there's a lot of research potential in there. That's a direction that our director, Ray Pompon, is really trying to push us in. So unfortunately, I wish I could sit here and say, oh yeah, threat campaigns, that's all us. It's like 1% us talking with those guys. It's mostly just their work though. And I again, Maxim Zavadchik, Andrei Shalnev, Roy Mishailov, a number of guys, Eli Kremenchuk, those guys are awesome at what they do. And a real sort of, their contribution at F5, I think, is perhaps a little bit bigger than a lot of folks realize.
Yeah, very cool. Well, I learned something. I certainly thought that was being generated from F5 Labs. We'll have to see if we can maybe get one or two of those folks from our Tel Aviv team on a future show.
Yeah, I wish we were making that output, but it's because it's fantastic work, but I can't take credit for it. And it's also kind of an interesting, just a reminder of how many different security teams there are at F5 doing slightly different things, you know? So we have the folks working under Mary, who's our CISO. They have a threat intel team. We got the 2 research teams in Tel Aviv. One is a little bit more fraud and malware focused, and one is a little bit more web attacks focused. Plus there's folks in the office of the CTO, and then there's labs, and then there's all the product security folks and the CERT. So getting all this security expertise into the same picture so that all these folks can talk and learn from each other is actually a surprising challenge.
Yeah. Yeah, I imagine everybody's all over the world and kind of working on their own stuff. But yeah, great to hear about this kind of stuff, because we still, amazingly enough, after kind of 9 years of working in BC, we talk to customers and they just have no real understanding of how much security expertise is available through F5, not only solutions, but just a bunch of very, very smart people who are 100% focused on security.
Yeah.
So we're just coming up on the end of our show here. Is normally what we'll do is put out some questions just to kind of learn a little bit more about you personally. Obviously, I think we did that just in chatting. But maybe the one question I'll ask you in kind of closing off here is, what's been kind of keeping you sane through this whole COVID thing and isolation and all that sort of stuff?
Well, honestly, the first answer is my girlfriend. Honestly, it's like I feel so lucky, because we actually, for a variety of reasons, we sort of spent the first half of the winter kind of stuck in the house with each other anyway, because we both had a long illness, which fortunately was unrelated to COVID, in January, and then I got sick again in March, and we were both kind of in and out. But basically, we've been in the same house now, stuck for 7 months, and it has been just great. So that's like, so she's really been the thing that's keeping me sane. But we've been biking a lot. We were both road biking and mountain biking until I fell off my mountain bike and dinged my knee a couple weeks ago. So I've got a little bit of a layoff. We just started building. Have you guys ever seen those kayak kits where it's like it's this amazing design? They ship you a bunch of pre-cut plywood panels. It's really, really thin plywood. And then you actually you use wires, like you drill holes in the edges and use wires to wire this whole thing into a boat frame. And then you fiberglass the whole thing, and then you cut out the wires.
Wow.
and it's like a single layer of fiberglass and epoxy over the plywood, and the combination of the plywood and the fiberglass makes it really, really strong to all different kinds of forces. So it's like it's strong to pressure, like impact, but it's also strong in terms of like torsion and flexion. These boats are really, really cool. We already have one already built, and they sell them in kits. So we've been like slowly building this thing up in the garage, and that's actually like I spent the whole weekend just down in my basement. Sorry, not the garage, in the basement. Spent the whole weekend in the basement, which was kind of goofy because the weather is great. But I'm like just slowly building this boat, and it is really, really satisfying. So that's the other than Lizzie keeping me sane, the boat building is keeping me sane. So
very cool.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much, Sander, for joining us here today. It was great chatting with you. And yeah, if we can get some of the links to some of the music that you've produced, we can share with folks that are listening in, that'd be very cool too.
Yeah, of course. Great to see you guys.
Okay. Thanks.
Thanks for checking this out today. If you're watching via YouTube right now, go ahead and click subscribe down below. Also click the bell for notifications. That way you will find out when we are dropping a new video or when we're going live. Also, there's darylandboo.com. If you head over to that, leave your name and email address, we will drop a weekly technical newsletter in your inbox every Monday. Also, this is available via podcast, Apple, Google, Spotify. Head over to one of those, hit subscribe, and you'll be able to listen to us in the car on your commute or during a walk or a run. Thank you very much, and we will see you next time.